Hi, I'm Mark Robertson. I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, Mark Robertson Talks, where I do videos or talks on a wide range of topics. This is our third installment, and today's topic is poverty in the United States and even around the world, and what causes it, and what has been done to try to alleviate it, what has failed, what has worked. And for the last 60 years, the United States has embarked in a war on poverty. It started in the mid 60s. And in my opinion, it's been virtually a total failure. Before that started, cities were largely peaceful, but now they've become war zones. And this is what happens when you spend $22 trillion dollars, and it basically pays women to have babies if the father doesn't stick around. So that creates chaos. Our inner cities, like I say, have turned to war zones largely because of government policy where incentives to have babies out of wedlock break up families. And it's been a cataclysm. Just last week, there were 105 people shot in Chicago. That's insanity. That's a war zone. That's one of the most dangerous places in the world. And it's been a disaster. And it's all brought about. You can read Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, two great African American writers and columnists and economists, say that the welfare state has brought so much harm to the African American community. And they have the babies out of wedlock, and then the father's not there. They grow up. The mother's often uncaring and incapable or missing in action. And these kids all grow up directionless, have no direction, and they get associated with gangs and things like this. And everybody has a need for family. So they find their family in these gangs, and they do outlandish things to have love of the gang, if that sounds warped enough. But that's what it develops into. And this welfare state, along with the moral decline, which many say was brought on by design as well, from people like the deranged Alfred Kinsey, who push sex and recreational sex and all this. It's very harmful and has brought much harm to society as a whole. But especially the African American community. And like I say, the out of wedlock birth has gone from about 11 to 14% in 1960 to well over 70% today, and much over that in areas. And it's a total disaster. And it's like I say, the families is broke down. It's not really breaking down the families. They're not even there to begin with. It's just a lady will have a child with more than one different male for different children. It's just total chaos. These kids don't have a chance. They grow up, there's no direction, and there's no love. They don't have any familial guidance at all. They have no teaching. It's just they run free. It's just not a good situation. But it's basically many in society are in denial of this. They say this, they say the problem is guns and things like that. It's not guns. It's the moral decay. It's the breakdown of the family in inner cities, largely brought about by the welfare state. And it's all about power and control. As crazy as this sounds, they don't want to solve the problems. People involved in welfare and the federal government, they don't want to solve the problems. That's where they get their money from. $22 trillion is a lot of money, and it's a major cash cow going into a lot of pockets other than just those on welfare, and it brings great harm to those on welfare. So only a small percentage of that 22 trillion actually went to the poor, and that created generations of dependency. It created inner cities that are war zones. It destroyed African American and other families. It just has been a total disaster on so many fronts. And it's all about that Democrat vote, though. They want to keep people down. They look the other way, all this carnage, and just so they'll vote Democrat for their pittance of money or whatever they think they get. And like I say, the family is broken down, and these young people that grow up, they don't know where they are. They don't know what's going on. They're all confused. They don't have fathers. They have no one that really cares for them. So like I say, they join these gangs and shootings every weekend in nearly all these major cities. And so much dysfunction, so many boys lost. They don't have consciences. They are not formed or developed, and it's just a total chaos. And they say it was good intentions. I'm not so sure. I think they know throughout history that it's you provide these welfare situations that'll trap people and it'll create more and it'll create a dependency. Well, that dependency will create people who keep voting for that dependency, and they know that these people are devilish in what they do. And it doesn't seem that the media is bothered by it. Yes, we've had some bad situations involving police, and it's actually very rare that it happens, but that makes the news for weeks. But you have a weekend in Chicago where 105 people are shot, and even in Chicago, it's not probably the lead story. It happens so much. I can't imagine working there on the police department and in one weekend having 105 people shot. How do you deal with that? Good grief. It's like it's worse than a war zone. I mean, it has to be one of the most dangerous places on the planet. And in my opinion, it's brought about largely by the welfare state and the decline of morality in the country. And, the war on poverty, the Great Society, was a disaster on every front. And it built these public housing places and the tall buildings that were very impersonal. They just were built for the poor and for housing, but they could not have been a bigger disaster. The poor moved in, they were all torn up, and became crime infested, drug infested, just really awful places. In St. Louis, they had Pruitt-Igoe. They ended up having to tear that down. It was such a disaster. It's predictable disaster. There's no ownership. They don't have to have any pride in keeping their place up. And I know a lot of people live in apartments and things like that, but they're privately owned, and it's still a bit of a problem. But government housing is always a failure. It never works. I mean, there's no accountability. There's no ownership. They can do what they want. So it works in reverse. I mean, I have worked in apartments. I still do sometimes, but I've seen people where Section 8 is also a government program that pays actual private owners of apartments money for the tenants. And I would guess over 95% of the people that live in those apartments tear those apartments up. I mean, it's crazy. It's awful. These people, they don't have any pride. They don't care about it. Most of them also have disability where they stay at home all day and don't do anything. And so they're getting free government housing, disability pay, and they're just kind of a drag on society. They have no incentive. Now, I know there's some that legitimately are disabled and can't work and can't make it on their own in the world. But even then, it can be handled at the state level. This shouldn't be a federal government situation. That's unconstitutional. And I've seen so much taken advantage of this. People on disability. This disability thing's another scam. I know a small percentage are disabled and they need the help, but a very large percentage are playing the games. They know how to work the system, and they take advantage of it. So it's really a sad situation. Government involvement in helping the poor overall. It just does not work. The war on poverty made things worse, and I say it made things worse by design. And it was not about helping the poor. It was about power. Sending an impersonal check from Washington is like sending poison. It doesn't help at all. It brings great harm. It brings no accountability. I mean, these people are in this situation, and it shows that they don't have any direction in their life. I know there's situations where people have tough things going on and need some help. Well, that can be local. That can be private. It has to be. That's the best way to do it. And it worked so well before the war on poverty, before the New Deal and Great Society. And the best way to help the poor is private charity. And because it makes people accountable. This may seem a bit cruel, but even private charity can cause a problem if it just gives money away willy-nilly without checking these people, or just helping them, or making sure that they're trying to make an effort to get out of their situation, helping them get jobs, finding out what they're good at, trying to create dignity for them. I remember in the 1990s, welfare reform came along, and that was actually a good thing the government did. I mean, it created the problem, so it did alleviate the federal problem, but these women got off of welfare, they had the dignity of a job, and it was heading in the right direction, but then Obama largely wiped out most of it, and so we're back to square one. But the federal government should be phased out of the welfare. It shouldn't be there. It's unconstitutional, and it brings more harm than good. Private charity is the answer. The federal government being involved in supposedly helping the poor also creates a disincentive. If people take for granted that, well, the government's doing it, I don't have to play my part, I can do other things. Well, people are designed to want to help their fellow man, and most people will help someone in true need. And so they say, well, there'll be too much need if the government gets out of the business of helping the poor. Totally disagree. I think, first of all, there'll be less poor. And when you are in a situation where you have to get a job, there's jobs available. Like I say, I worked in this apartment complex, and I've seen so many people come along looking for work that they can get paid. They don't even need much skills. It's just cleaning or picking things up or cutting grass or cutting branches. They don't have to be an electrician or a plumber or anything like that. And then they make decent money, but they virtually all leave after a few days on the job because I don't know. And it's just a deal where they're so lost. I mean, they don't have their abilities brought out, their true abilities or God-given gifts. But even this is a start. It gets them on the right track to finding out what those are, finding what they want to do, what they don't want to do, but they just leave. And I guess go back to living on the government, or I don't know how they survive actually. But I've seen it so often. And it may sound cruel, but it doesn't work. Even unemployment benefits, they don't work. Yes, the recent crisis, healthcare crisis, a lot of people lost their jobs through no fault of their own. I have no problem with helping them out, but you got to even be careful there. But unemployment benefits, for the most part, create disincentives to find other work. And it's not a good situation either. And like I say, the disability is a scam as well. Most people take advantage of that. And it's just not a good situation. And private charity is the answer. It's not a panacea, but it worked so well before the New Deal in the 1930s largely launched the welfare state in this country. And there's so many private organizations, churches. Most hospitals were run by churches, so the poor were taken care of in the hospitals. Now you got all this Medicare bureaucracy and everything else that's really created problems and actually has made things worse for the poor, in my opinion. And it's just really a mess. The poor were better taken care of in hospitals before the Medicaid came about. Thomas Woods, a great economist, has written on that in his book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, and other places as well. He's talked about the failure of Medicare and Medicaid. And so it just doesn't work. Helping the poor like this is a disaster. Private charity is the answer. And it's the best way to go. And it helps the poor. Now, why wouldn't, I think a major problem as well is people get trapped in the feeling that they're never going to be able to escape this poverty. Well, when they're on the welfare, they don't really have to do that. They can't get out and find out who they are, what they thrive at, what they're good at. And you got to get out into the world and take a chance. And if you're just sitting at home in your apartment, that doesn't work. Or wherever you are, you got to go forward. You got to fall down. You got to get back up again. And that the welfare state diminishes that as well. That's a part of getting along in the world, just taking that chance, going out there. Well, if you have that security of the welfare state, you don't want to do it. You can't do that, and it actually gets in the way of helping people and making them better. It's just not a good situation at all. I remember reading that Ben Franklin was in London, and he couldn't believe all the people that were what they call paupers. And London or England at that time was the richest country in the world. And they, well, how can this be? Well, they passed poor laws. So they were basically essentially paying people to be poor. Well, that happens all the time. It's an incentive to not go out and make yourself a better person. If you can get paid to just be idle and not do anything. And going forward is all about going forward and falling back and falling down and getting up. Well, when you're provided for, you don't have to worry about doing that. And you don't really go out and go through what it takes to keep moving forward. And the government will provide that for you, provide your needs and things like this. And it just really creates a psychological problems too. You just really kind of have a bad feeling about yourself and the world. Whereas when you're going out and taking a few risks, not crazy risk, but that's what kind of incentivizes you to do better and to get your life going. And the welfare state gets in the way of all of that. And like I said, the welfare state should be phased out. And it's not good whether it's in the United States or around the world. The socialist countries that provide you from womb to tomb are not successful countries. It's not good. The welfare state is not the way to help the poor. Private charity is the answer with accountability. There's always exceptions where there's really are truly needy people, but the United States especially is a generous people, and they will be helped as they always were before all of this government bureaucracy entered the scene through FDR largely, and turned our country largely into a welfare state. Like I say, $22 trillion and counting at last check. And when I do these videos, I'm not an expert or a specialist, but I like to send people that way. And maybe the best book ever written on this situation, there's a couple of them actually, about the problem of helping the poor, the government programs, and all the problems that is brought about. Probably one of the most famous is The Tragedy of American Compassion by Marvin Olasky, and it covers what we've talked about, all the disasters and public financing of poverty programs, and how it actually has backfired and made things worse and hurt people and trapped generations into dependency, and it's created major problems for the poor and for so many other people. We've spent so much money. If that money could have been privately invested, the country would have so much more wealth. And the jobs, as Ronald Reagan always said, the job is the best thing to end poverty. And that $22 trillion would have been invested in the private sector. It would have raised standards of living so much, but just government's basically throwing it into an inferno. It doesn't work. It doesn't help anybody. But anyway, The Tragedy of American Compassion by Marvin Olasky. And I don't have actually a copy of the book. Actually, I have it on cassette tape. I listened to it. But the famous book, Losing Ground by Charles Murray, too. It gets into all the numbers and all the measurements of how the war on poverty has actually greatly brought harm to so many. And it was, whether it's good intentions or not, the famous saying, the path to hell is paved with good intentions, but I'm not even so sure there were good intentions. It was by design, in my opinion, to trap people into dependency and have power over them, to get them to vote their way. And it's been a total failure. And largely, like I say, by design. You just, it's ridiculous what has been done to so many generations of people since the war on poverty started in the 1960s. And another book, we talked about pauperism in London. Alex de Tocqueville, he's the famous French philosopher and economist who traveled to America and wrote about his excursion here and what he saw. He also has a book called Memoir on Pauperism, and it basically talks about what we talked about and why there was pauperism to such a degree in England when it was at that time the wealthiest country in the world, and he talks about the poor law as basically an incentive to bring about poverty. So those are some good things to read, to learn about the actual situation in the so-called war on poverty and why it has failed and what actually works in helping the poor. Before we go, my last video was on the problems I have with public schooling and all the disaster that is. And I talked about a couple books there, but I didn't mention one. It's called Get Out Now: Why You Should Pull Your Child from Public Schools Before It's Too Late by Mary Rice Hassan and Teresa Farnan. And it's a very good book, and it's chilling actually, of all the crazy things going on in government schooling. And once again, the government strikes out. It doesn't, about everything it's involved in along these lines is a disaster, whether it's healthcare, whether it's supposedly helping the poor, whether it's education. It makes things worse. All of these should be done on the local level, private local level. It's the most effective way to do it. It's how it was done for many years before the welfare state came along with FDR and later LBJ. And the government just keeps growing, 4 or 5 trillion a year and $22 trillion in debt. I mean, that's how much we've spent on the war on poverty. I just think if we didn't, we'd be out of debt. And it's been a total failure. And it's time to turn things around to get the war on poverty in the private sector. Yes, it's our obligation biblically to help the poor. No problem with that. And but what does helping the poor mean? Does it mean just giving them stuff? No, it means getting them headed in the right direction, maybe even some tough love, and getting them going And that's the best way to help them. And yes, you can provide material needs. There's so many generous people in this country. There's so many programs going on. There's so many organizations. There's so many people that help people one-on-one. This is a very caring country. The government, the federal government especially, should get out of the business of welfare. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next time, and hope you have a great day. Mark Robertson here.